Hi everyone. This is a quick webinar for everybody out there who can't make it to our Drop It and Learn session on the scholarship of teaching and learning. And one of the reasons we chose this topic is because we just recently sent out our request for proposals for the Dr. Susan J. Hillman Center for the Enrichment of Teaching and Learning SoTL mini grants. And so everybody that's here in some capacity as a faculty member is eligible to apply for the grants, and we thought that we would do a drop in and learn session this week on what really is SoTL. So we're going to look at some of the types of scholarship of teaching and learning and some of the key resources to start the process. We'll talk about different research methods that can be used, and hopefully by the end of this presentation, you should be able to begin to formulate your own SoTL research questions and begin to identify some of the areas where you might want to publish this. So why SoTL? I really enjoyed this quote. SoTL is the scholarship of teaching and learning. It's not a discrete activity or an approach, but a way of thinking. And it's a vision in which faculty habits and values as scholars are brought to bear on their interactions with students. One of the great conversations I had with someone who dropped by the center was, I said, think about your class as generating data for you, and you're scientifically thinking about how it is that you are teaching your students and how you're measuring their learning. And that can be a SoTL project. So there's a lot of different definitions out there, but you know, kind of the key aspects of those definitions include that there's a problem posed about an issue of teaching and learning. You want to study that problem using appropriate methods, take the application of the results, communicate those results, and then reflect on them. But really importantly, what differentiates scholarly teaching, which is how, hopefully all of us are thinking about teaching, which is like, how do I improve this? The difference between scholarly teaching and the scholarship of teaching and learning is that we take that project to the peer review process and ultimately disseminate that amongst our peers to try to improve the teaching that's occurring within our disciplines. So types of SoTL questions include the what is, what works, what would happen if, and development of new frameworks. More often than not, we're looking at the what is and what works. So what is moves you towards understanding a problem or behavior. For example, what is the current level of understanding that my students have? What works is typically what we're thinking about when we're being scholarly. We're thinking about what am I doing to impact the learning of my students? So finding evidence for effectiveness at various types of interventions. So your question might be, to what extent does this new assignment improve student learning or student skill in something? What would happen if is very similar to what works, but it's sort of a reverse. Now in this case, the questions could be sort of similar, but the outcome is defined by the results. So in this case, you're not identifying what you want to measure, but you're looking at what happens once you do it, and that's helping you identify what you might measure in the future. So what would happen if I incorporated reflective writing into my course? And then lastly, the really more broad philosophical question is sort of the development of a new framework, which is really answering questions to develop a new model or a new way of understanding how you practice this teaching. So one of the things when I do this with faculty members is take 5 minutes to yourself, pause the video, and think of an area in your course that you'd like to improve, or an area that students struggle with, or you might struggle with. And why is that difficult? What have you tried? And what I want you to do is actually write down a possible research question that you might ask yourself related to the course. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just jot something down. So once you get your question down, now what else do you need to continue? We need to understand the background of the question. And sometimes some of us are so rooted in what we're doing that we really intuitively understand the background. So this is the point where I start sharing my ideas with my colleagues. So send your question out. You can send it to me. We can find you colleagues around the university if you're interested, and have them ask questions about your topic. And those questions give you a better understanding about how you might need to flesh out your background, what areas you might need to research, or how you might measure your outcome. So again, this is my email address. I'm happy to help you as you develop your question. As we start developing that background, we need to know where to look for background literature. Now, this was probably the most challenging area for me when I first started thinking about scholarship of teaching and learning. I went to school to be a pharmacist initially. What did I know about teaching? And so I was really, really familiar with things like PubMed and Medline, but not so much ERIC and Academic Search and a number of other library databases. So remember, your databases are ways in which you search the literature, and different databases have different access to different journals. So things like ERIC and Academic Search Complete, these tend to have a lot of educational journals in their repertoire and are a great place to start your search for background. Our library, une.edu/library, also has lots of ebooks on these topics. So you can go to some of our databases. There's one that I was poking around on, one called Credo, and I like to call this the If You Don't Know What You Don't Know. It's a great place where you can just type in a topic and it will pull up kind of almost like an encyclopedia style review of the topic, the history of the topic, and it gives you a good place to start if you don't know who are the key players in certain subjects. So I find that helpful. You can also go to the library and start to browse subjects, kind of unrelated. There's tons of ebooks out there, and one of my favorite ones to sort of just start thinking about how to be a more scholarly teacher or start thinking about changing my teaching is this one by Doyle and Sarajek. And then EBSCO also has an ebook online collection as well. So these are some great resources. Here at SoTL, if you happen to be on campus and you have access to us and want to drop by, you can look at our library using this link here, and we've tagged all the books in our library with certain key topics. So if you're thinking about learning theory, you can type in you can click on the tag learning theory. It'll show you all the books that we have available for you to use here. So good places to think. Other sources, bibliographies of good papers that you found. You might want to think about using Google Scholar. It's not a library database, but a free database. One of the things I've learned at some of these educational conferences that I go to is that not all journals are found in any one place. So it's good to use a lot of different types of research and database search tools. And the Carnegie Foundation has always consistently been a great resource for teaching background. And so I included that link there as well. So how to design your study. The biggest question really is quantitative versus qualitative, or maybe a little bit of both. So a quick review. There's an element of subjectivity in both of these, but all research should be systematic, validated by the participants, and then ultimately replicable and peer-reviewed. So if we choose to go quantitative, this is typically numeric value with descriptive statistics. So you're going to give numerical answers, assess relationships, maybe probabilities. Qualitative is more contextual. There's text, visual data. There's a lot of rich detail in qualitative data, and that really directly reflects the voice of the participant. So it helps you find themes. It helps you find ideas about process and student understanding. So incorporating a little bit of both is very helpful. Now you may find your discipline tends to only use quantitative or only use qualitative, and just remember both are equally valid. They just live in different areas of science. There's the And so one of the nice research method websites that I found is the Social Research Methodologies, for those of you who might not be as familiar with some of the different types of methods out there. And that brings us to the next part of this section. So you've created your research question, you've fleshed out the background, now you're going to figure out, how do I want to actually study this? And so this is where the methodologies come into place. And there's a number of different types. So I'll go through this kind of quickly because you can read it yourself. But there's different ways to think about this. You could have a course portfolio or a course reflection. Now, in this case, you're having a reflective discussion about the content and the goals of your course. It's a very broad approach. So you describe the plans of what you want to accomplish in student learning, you incorporate evidence, and there's a reflective narrative among all these goals. So this is really sort of writing reflectively. There's interviews and focus groups, and these tend to be really good at capturing the experience of the students. So face-to-face, open-ended, typically for them to be strongly valid, require trained individuals or facilitators. And one of the downsides is they don't allow for anonymous participation, but they best answer research questions concerned with participants' voice. And one of the things that I think is really helpful for us to gain understanding into students' actual learning and understanding of content is to have that think out loud question where you ask students to verbalize how they would solve a problem or a task, and that really gives you a lot of insight. So that can be a very powerful tool here. Observational research involves observing the classrooms and using note-taking or audio or videotaping. So this one really requires you to be able to observe your students at any given time. The analysis depends on this observational method, and data can be coded as qualitative or quantitative. So you might need to have multiple people involved so that they can code the data and check each other. And then there's some ethical and practical considerations to think about. As an observer, are you covert or overt? Are you hiding in the corner, or are you allowing students to understand that you're there? And how does that impact bias, remembering what the Hawthorne effect is? And as an observer, are you also participating? So this can be a little bit tricky, but certainly a way that works. Probably by far the most common way that people look at their teaching is by administering questionnaires. These are really helpful because you can get both quantitative and qualitative data. You can ask Likert-style questions or multiple choice questions or ranking questions, and that gives you numerical data that you can analyze. But you can also ask open-ended questions. What do you think this class should do X, Y, Z? And then you get a broader response from your students. So these tend to have a little bit higher inter-rater reliability and validity because the questionnaire can be replicated fairly consistently over time. Now, the nice thing about questionnaires is it also allows you to administer them anonymously. So you may tend to get better responses from your students or buy-in if they feel like they want to respond to you anonymously. Last couple here include content analysis, and then we'll do a secondary analysis. So content analysis is an interesting approach, and it's really, really helpful when it comes to thinking about what's happening, especially if you've got lots of writing assignments for your students. So in this case, you're analyzing the written text or the images that students have produced, and you're looking for patterns or types of things that happen over time. And so you can use what's already happening in the course as the data for your research question, and you can analyze processes that might happen over time. So perhaps you've created a research an assignment that is a consistently similar assignment over the length of your course, but as students' learning improves, you might see that there's a change in the learning that happens over time. So content analysis might be a good way to capture what that difference is and analyze it and share it with others. Secondary analysis is sort of the retrospective thoughts. So looking backwards, looking at pre-existing data. So you could have previous classes that you've run. It may offer you surrogate data points as a way to triangulate methods. So perhaps you've run something in your class prospectively this semester. You might look back and say, okay, well, how did it work out last semester when I did this differently? Or you can also think about how does this triangulate to sort of third-party metrics such as board pass rates or things like that. So then we get to sort of the mixed methods. So experiments and quasi-experimental. It's sort of a mixture of both. And now these are interesting because experiments are truly the best way to measure if something has happened in a causal relationship. But we get into some ethical quandaries here about randomizing students and randomizing their learning experiences. Are they all truly getting an equal learning experience if you completely randomize them? So one of the quasi-experimental designs in SoTL is looking at maybe you teach your morning session one way and you teach your PM session another way. You know that both might work, but you want to compare the responses to students and if one has strengths or weaknesses. Now, because the two groups weren't initially randomized, there may be some validity concerns there. But again, you can address this in your discussion, and sometimes you can adjust for that. Case studies are a way to sort of just narrowly focus on a single assignment or a single class or a single course. And so you're just looking very, very sort of laser focused at one thing, but you might look at it over a very long period of time. And it gives you a very deep understanding of the evolution of a process, but you're really only looking at one thing. So the question is, how much more can you externalize the results? It might be very helpful for you. And multi-method, as I've sort of been alluding to, there's many methods to get the final answer. Great. So one of the things that I would say next is, now that you've got your research question, hit pause, think about which one of these methods that we reviewed might be the best way for you to set up your study design. So at the top of your paper, you should have your research question, and below you should be thinking about, how will I set up my design? How will I study this? What is possibly my intervention? Or what is the outcome that I'm looking to see? And how would I measure that? Would a focus group be the best way? Would a survey be the best way? Can I observe my class or have someone else come and observe and create notes and then code them? So take some time, think about it, and put that down. And that's going to be the next method, the next step in developing your research question. Just a quick touch base in terms of reliability and validity. Some of the things, this comes from the pharmacy literature. They had a really great article that was published in 2013 about reliability and validity in scholarship of teaching and learning articles. And so they had suggested that using these tools helps us to strengthen the literature. So remember, validity is the degree to which a test accurately measures something. Reliability is the reproducibility of assessment scores. And so I've listed some of these here. You'll see these frequently when we talk about analyzing exams. And what is the inter-reader reliability of a test question, or the KR12 or the Cronbach alpha of a test. And that really helps us understand how reliable internally is the test, how consistently will a student score that test answer based on their knowledge that they have if you were repeating it over time. So these are important statistical things to think about, but don't let them get you hung up in the beginning stages of this. We can always, flush those things out later. So now that you've got your question and your methods, review those methods with your friends again. Share them with your colleagues. Ask them if they think that this makes sense. Have you paired the correct outcome with what your research question is? And then sort of finalize what you're going to do in terms of the methods. Once you do that, you've pretty much fleshed out how you think you're going to approach this process. So then its next steps would be IRB and funding. So for funding, this is where I make the plug for the SoTL mini grants. These SoTL mini grants were named after the founding faculty member who created the Center for Enrichment in Teaching and Learning, Dr. Susan J. Hillman. And these proposals come out, the request for proposal came out last week, and it's due by the end of April. So these grants run for about 12 months, and they range anywhere between $1,500 to $3,000. And many of different disciplines have educational associations. They also have grants. And so for the SoTL mini grant application, you're going to put the grant application in first and then work on getting your IRB proposal approved. I would suggest doing them similar or around the same time, but you might want to wait to make sure that you've got the grant funding before you go through the IRB process, unless you're going to go and study it anyway. So IRB, what is IRB? Is it scary? The answer is no. Most of our SoTL type research falls under what's called an application for exemption in the IRB. So because we're not having a significant impact on human life and human healthcare, we tend to be able to go through a more expedited review process, but it still has to be reviewed. We have to make sure that there's no harm that would come to any of our students based on the research that we're doing on them. And so this is a fairly straightforward application. une.edu/IRB, or if you search IRB on the UNE website, that will get you right to the IRB page, and they have all of the applications laid out for you. So go ahead and click on the exemption one and download that, and you'll see it's a form that you'll fill out, and then you'll type up, it's only a 2-page sort of summary, 2 or 3-page summary of what your research project looks like. And it's a great first step in helping you understand what you're going to study, and it also helps you as you are thinking about preparing that grant to really clarify what it is that you're looking to do. So you've conducted the study. What are your next steps then? Successfully got a mini grant, awesome work. Next steps is then to present and to publish and to begin to disseminate this work with your peers. So there's a number of different teaching conferences that are sort of broad, multidisciplinary that I wanted to share with everybody. There's a teaching professor conference that's happening this June in Atlanta, Georgia. There's the Lilly conferences. Those happen sort of regionally throughout the year, which is nice because you almost always got an opportunity to be able to present at some point in time. And so January has obviously passed. The February ones are just happening this month in Anaheim, and then we've got June ones in Bethesda. And so then lastly, the ISSOTL. This is the International Scholarship of Teaching and Learning Organization. If you'd like to go to Norway, that'd be pretty cool. That's happening this October. So those are presentations. You can take a poster there. If you get a SoTL mini grant from SoTL, then one of our requests is that you participate in our end-of-year poster presentation. You can present preliminary data or your finalized data, and this is one way that we try to help get you one step on the next stage of then presenting and disseminating this. So if you do a final poster with us in May, you should be all set then to be able to present that poster then at a national conference. Once you've presented the poster, it's always great to get feedback from people on that poster, see what their thoughts are, what questions did they have. That always helps me in my discussion section of my papers. The next step then is to write it up. And so these are some of the common publications or journals that publish Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, but there's a great list of annotated journals here where you can go ahead and click on that link, and you should be able to see any type of journal for any type of topic that you're interested in that publishes Scholarship of Teaching and Learning publications. So that's a great resource as well. As always, we are here at the center to help. So if you've got questions, please feel free to drop by. The drop-in and learns are Tuesday from 9 to 4 and Wednesday from 9 to 4. But again, this webinar will be up and available for anybody at any time. And if you'd like to drop in and use the Zoom link, then that Zoom link is also open as well. So I hope this was helpful for everybody. It wasn't too long. And of course, please send us, Carl or myself, an email if you'd like more information.